Welcome to This Week in the Warner Archive Collection, where we discuss our newest releases. I'm George Feltenstein, and I'm proud to be joined by my colleagues Matt Patterson and D.W. Ferranti. Today's Warner Archive Collection presents you with 10 new releases on Blu-ray, except for one, which is available on DVD. So that's 9 Blu-rays and 1 DVD. Well, as we approach our 12th anniversary, I would say that reflects a big difference in where the Warner Archive is going. 9 new Blu-rays, pretty exciting. So let's talk about what these new releases are, gentlemen. We start off with a long-demanded, long-awaited title that is now celebrating its 31st anniversary. We should have put a banner on the top of the package, 31st anniversary edition, but we didn't do that. Christian Slater stars with Samantha Mathis and Alan Moyle's 1990 New Line Cinema classic, Pump Up the Volume. Very, very exciting to bring this to Blu-ray. It's been a long time since this film has been promoted, and it is very much of its time and yet very much something to be considered in our time. And this is something we're going to have a lot to say about. Changing thematics significantly, we have a pretty major 4K scan of a Technicolor classic that was a big success at the box office. It is the 1951 MGM version of Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein's adaptation of Edna Ferber's novel Showboat, starring Howard Keel, Katherine Grayson, and Ava Gardner. People have been wanting this on Blu-ray for years, and we've given it an amazing restoration. We'll be talking about that. Next, we have 2 films in glorious Technicolor starring Doris Day. We have My Dream Is Yours from 1949, directed by Michael Curtiz, no less, and The Charming on Moonlight Bay from 1951. Then we have 2 bona fide classics from the golden era at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, the David O. Selznick production of A Tale of Two Cities from 1935, starring Ronald Colman, and Clark Gable and Jeanette MacDonald star with Spencer Tracy in 1936's San Francisco. Making a whopping leap ahead almost 20 years, we have Elia Kazan's Warner Brothers epic Baby Doll, written by a guy named Tennessee Williams. And that stars Carol Baker with Carl Malden. And it's making its Blu-ray debut, and it's in its proper aspect ratio of 1:8:5. Next, we move to a different kind of baby doll, and that's a DC baby doll, an animated one that's got quite an edge to her adventures. This is an animated series, Harley Quinn, the complete first and second seasons. So Harley Quinn came out on DVD last year. Alas, there was no Blu-ray. Fans made us quite aware that they expected us to deliver it. Well, we did. And in synchronicity with the release of the DVD of Season 2, we also have a Blu-ray that brings you both Season 1 and Season 2. And with Kaylee Cuoco providing the voice, it's quite a shock to hear Big Bang's Penny talk with an X-rated mouth. But there you go. Next, we have a complete turn of events, an amazing documentary that doesn't fit any pat categories. James Lapine directs SIX by Sondheim. It's a portrait of the life and career of Broadway legend Stephen Sondheim, who is the, I would say, probably preeminent musical theater creator of the second half of the 20th century. And then last but not least, we have a mini-series that was originally seen on the Epix network. It's Helter Skelter, And this is more of a docudrama, more documentary and drama, not to be confused with the earlier TV movies from the 70s and the aughts about the Charles Manson saga. So a lot to talk about. Gentlemen, let's start the discussions by pumping up the volume to 11, if you will.
I do have to say it was a little disturbing to realize that this movie is 31 years old. But on the other hand, of course it is, because this movie actually dates to a time when people were afraid of music. And no one's been afraid of music for 20 years, which is too bad for the youth, because I don't know what they'd get to push back against except for college loans now.
Well, that's an interesting point of debate. I mean, because censorship itself, which is a big deal in this film, it becomes part of the message. And while older censorship methods have somewhat changed, there are perhaps very dirty songs, especially in the rap and pop genre, which, you know, kids are listening to now, and you can go on YouTube and watch reaction videos of parents reacting. So this is still an issue today. But
what you just described is a distraction and not a threat, whereas up through the 90s, we had congressional hearings and witch hunts based on musical lyrics. Those days are gone.
And that is exactly the intensity. You're right, Dan. I mean, the intensity is different. And that's why this film, and there are other, especially more from England, there are pirate radio, movies and shows. Also, around this time, the Eric Bogosian film and Broadway shows Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll was out. And by making this a teen story, right, and starring Christian Slater, who had just come off the sort of rebellious Heathers, really struck a nerve with a lot of, especially kids. Maybe I'm getting way ahead of myself. Perhaps, Dan, you can just explain to everybody exactly what the plot is, because, this isn't pirate radio, and I probably should cede my time.
Please don't talk like that. You don't know. You're triggering. Briefly, for the few people that are either too young or too old to know the story of Pump Up the Volume, which is definitely a touchstone film for an entire generation of Americans, Christian Slater, as Matt said, fresh off of Heathers, plays hard-on Harry, who is it's something of a superhero tale, actually, because by day, Harry is a mild-mannered student by the name of Mark Hunter at a small, typical Arizona town, but at night, he is hard-on Harry, the host of a pirate radio station that skips around the dial, finding open bandwidth in which Harry can opine on youth, rock, and one's inability to be sexually satisfied as an adolescent. And Harry tries to keep his world separate, but his own Lois Lane, played by a young and brilliant Samantha Mathis, decodes his identity and pulls Harry/Mark into taking a stand on behalf of the kids against their oppressive principal, which, if you know your genre, at this time, the bad guys were either school principals or real estate developers. Right, and it's also interesting that you mentioned how pirate radio was much more of a punk rock phenomena in the UK, which did happen over here, but wasn't quite like it was there. Director behind Pump Up the Volume was Canadian, so it's somebody who is very much situated between those two worlds. And the film does have a great soundtrack.
At the moment, like, this was right around when pop music itself was about to change. The internet hadn't broken out yet. So while this film wasn't a huge hit at the time, it kind of really just gathered a following as time has gone on, and it's incredible fun to revisit, especially on Blu-ray.
Yeah, there's a few other films like it, both 10 or 15 years before and then through. There's not many, but it definitely occupies the same sort of youth cult space a film like Penelope Spheeris's Suburbia takes place in. Or even the other Suburbia, based on the Bogosian play.
Yeah. Yes, actually, yeah. So so this is just great to see. So you were very right, Dan. Like this was the authorities arrayed against youth voices were much more formidable and backed by large institutions.
I want to throw a bit of a shout out to Christian Slater's performance in this film because I've seen some snarky online reviewers talk about how this is solidly in his Jack Nicholson period from Heathers. And it's like, no, it's not. I mean, yes, it came after Heathers, but Christian Slater is not doing the thing he did in Heathers in this role.
You know, in his recent reappearance on Mr. Robot and stuff, you know, this is also part of that Christian Slater mythos that built that in. So if you're a fan of Mr. Robot and you haven't seen this, this is another good little piece to catch up on that.
George, any additional insight?
Well, I remember being very, very impressed with this when it first came out, and I thought it was cutting edge, not a mass audience appeal film. And I was right, because it was not a blockbuster. It found its audience through cable television and video cassettes, because by the time DVD came around, it was already, I think the DVD release was in 99, so it was almost 10 years. But it never got revisited. I mean, this should have been on Blu-ray probably 12, 13 years ago. That's one of the things we like to do is correct the errors of the past. And now, we saw the reaction to it when we announced it. We've been blowing up the internet a lot since the new year, but this really created quite a thunder. But anyway, pump up the volume. We shouldn't forget to tell you that this is a brand new master, of course. It is a new 2021 scan 1080p HD master with a gorgeous 5.1 track that really takes full advantage of the music that permeates the film, and it looks like film. It has a nice light grain structure to it that reminds you that you're watching a movie. This is a brave movie for New Line to make in 1990. New Line was still kind of defining themselves in what they would produce as opposed to what they would acquire. They wanted to prove they could produce things other than Nightmare on Elm Street sequels. All in all, Pump Up the Volume is a big deal for us, and we're really excited to bring it to you. Speaking of big deals, our next release represents a massive restoration effort taken up by Warner Brothers Motion Picture Imaging, and I must say also our film restoration mavens who take care of our library so beautifully. This is the 1951 MGM Technicolor remake of Showboat, based on the stage musical of the same name that hit Broadway in 1927 and was filmed by Universal twice, first as a part talkie in 1929 and then most memorably by James Whale in 1936. And MGM bought the right to Showboat from Universal a mere 2 years later, 1938, and I'm assuming they intended maybe make it with Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald, but that didn't come to pass, and it wasn't until 1951 that they actually made it. They followed the L.B. Mayer mantra of do it big, do it right, and give it class. This is a sumptuous production, beautiful use of Technicolor, wonderfully directed by George Sidney, starring Howard Keel, Katherine Grayson, Ava Gardner, Margin Gower Champion, and a young singer who really wasn't known at the time, William Warfield, playing the role of Joe singing Old Man River, which is truly one of the highlights of the film. There's some controversy to this film from Broadway purists who think that it's too different from the original Broadway show. With no disrespect meant for the 1936 James Whale film, which is a classic unto and of itself, I think it is kind of like comparing apples and oranges, because what Arthur Freed as producer and George Sidney were doing, in my opinion, was creating a more contemporary interpretation of the basic Edna Ferber storyline, and they actually used more of the original Broadway score than the 1936 film did. The musical performances are phenomenal. I prefer the vocalizing of Howard Keel and Katherine Grayson to that of Alan Jones and Irene Dunne, but I probably am making a lot of people angry by saying that. That's just my personal preference. And you get the wondrous addition of seeing Margin Gower Champion, who really hadn't made an impact in movies and then got an MGM contract after this performance as the performers Frank and Ellie. And it moves at a click. It was shot almost entirely on the MGM backlot. The MGM Lot 3 was big enough for them to build this cotton blossom. And it's really, from the moment the movie starts, you know you're in for something spectacular. It's a great love story. The performers are all terrific. The songs are all terrific. And most importantly, for the Blu-ray collector, this presentation is terrific. This is one of those MGM Technicolor negatives that didn't burn in the nitrate fire. It's complete from the original nitrate negatives, and it's been lovingly restored, and the 3 Technicolor negatives have been aligned perfectly, and it looks absolutely sensational. But wait, there's more. You get the original mono soundtrack as it was seen in theaters, but you also get a stereo track that was created over 25 years ago for a Laserdisc release and hasn't been heard since. And it represents a multitude of preliminary production elements so that it sounds truly sumptuous and truly stereo. It is really a wonderful presentation. And last but not least, you get George Sidney himself, the director, who recorded the commentary for the Laserdisc. He recorded the commentary with me sitting right next to him.
I was going to say, I've looked at that Laserdisc many times, and there's a familiar name in the credits on the back.
Yeah, that's right. George had such fondness for this film. He's so proud of it. And you can hear that in the commentary. And we're so fortunate that we have this all these years later, because the DVD, aside from being really ugly, did not have the stereo soundtrack and did not have George's commentary. We are very fortunate to have it. And I should also mention that we have the whole Showboat excerpt from 1946's Till the Clouds Roll By in high definition, with Katherine Grayson also playing Magnolia in that excerpt. Tony Martin and Lena Horne and Virginia O'Brien are among the MGM stars in this little mini version of Showboat that started that movie. And that's included here in HD as well. And you also get Ava Gardner's vocals that are audio only. Ava had a perfect singing voice for the part. They should have used her in the movie, but they wanted someone who sounded a little more operatic, and they went with an actress named Annette Warren to dub her vocals. Ava's vocals were used on the soundtrack album in order to put her picture on the cover of the soundtrack album and sell more copies, but we have Ava's vocals on the supplementary audio material of this disc so that you can hear how she interpreted the songs, and it's a really great package. Gentlemen, what did you think?
I'd just like to say, and maybe Dan, this might be a perspective that you could talk about, but in a way, musicals, and especially amazing musicals like this one that have stood the test of time, are almost like superhero movies, right? And
right.
That there's so many different versions of them and interpretations with like different actors and songs, and like, you know, George, you were talking about like, oh, what's your favorite one? That's almost like asking a Batman fan, like, who's your favorite Batman? You know, and so as I was listening to you, George, I just kept thinking that's just how powerful these musicals are, and that you can go back to them and mix and match pieces going all the way back, you know, to pre-musical source materials and plays, and get something new out of them. This disc, packed with as much stuff as it has, just really champions this vision of the show in such a way that it has, of course, influenced everything that comes after. So it's like, you know, these are masterpieces of musical craft. I mean, that's just...
I mean, all right, neither one of you have mentioned Joey Brown, so you both get demerit.
And I didn't mention Agnes Moorehead either.
Yeah, so you both get demerits, but that's okay. That's why I'm here. But it's interesting you mentioned the superhero movies, because I was actually going to say something. Spielberg famously said that superhero movies were today's Westerns, and nobody understood what he meant, which he meant the common form of movie parlance, much as you just meant superhero. And what's interesting about Showboat in particular is it sort of has this funny gender swap Western trope to it, in that the main storyline between the Ava Gardner character and the Katherine Grayson character is very similar to the Westerns trope of the old man going down and the young person coming up, because we've got the established singer who's undone due to racial politics, and then we've got the young singer who then takes her place on stage, and then of course it comes around to sort of a happy duel.
But this is just a fantastic example of not only a musical, but what the Blu-ray format is all about.
Much like the next film, My Dream Is Yours, which continues our unblemished Doris in HD streak we're currently on. My Dream Is Yours, and George, you correct me if I'm wrong, was the second film she made?
That's correct.
And
feature film.
Right, and Curtiz was so taken with her when they were making Romance on the High Seas, he was immediately like, let's do another picture with Doris.
She was under contract to Michael Curtiz Productions, which I believe this was. His independent production company lasted very, very brief period of time. He decided he liked it better being studio employee director. So he dissolved his company and the studio took on ownership of the film. But My Dream Is Yours is not your average musical. It's very different. It's a little bit on the dark side at times. It is one of the few films that Martin Scorsese often mentioned as having been an inspiration for him when making New York, New York, which is very, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I mean, even though this is, you know, of the time frame, and, you know, don't expect a pre-code musical or a post-code musical.
No.
But it's a very adult musical.
And I sort of think of these as the long hair Doris Day movies. I don't, you know, just because that's just how I sort of sort it. But this one really does have, you know, it's gritty. It has the feeling of almost like the underbelly of Hollywood itself, because Doris Day is the talent that a pretty desperate Jack Carson brings to Hollywood to try to make, because he's lost his biggest client in the world of, I guess, radio advertising, right? Which is like kind of at the time lower end of broadcast show business. And what a wonderful use of the location and the time and the feel of an industry and a place that has changed so much. And it really, the flavor of it is very fetching and very different, and really sticks to you. You know, it's just a really interesting topic to tackle with a music.
Doris plays a single mother in this. Her character, Martha Gibson, has a young son, and to her having a child, we do have a very delightful guest appearance in the middle of the film, because the child falls asleep dreaming of Bugs Bunny. This being a Warner picture, we have Bugs actually shows up with a friend, and the sequence is directed by the great Looney Tunes director Friz Freleng. So you don't just get Curtiz, you get Freleng.
The sequence is called Freddy Get Ready, which is a little play on the Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody, which was also used in Rhapsody Rabbit. When I was a kid and I saw My Dream Is Yours, I desperately wanted a soundtrack album, but no such thing existed at that time. They weren't doing soundtrack albums, but I wanted the recording of Bugs Bunny singing Freddy Get Ready. And it really wasn't until, I guess, the late 90s when we had our joint venture with Rhino Records and were doing soundtrack CDs and did Doris Day at Warner Brothers the early years, that dream finally came true for me because we got to put those tracks from the three first Doris Day movies at Warner Brothers on a CD called It's Magic.
So George's dream is now your dream.
Also should mention the leading man in this film is Jack Carson, and he plays Doris's agent, also falls in love with her. And in real life, they actually were dating, which is something I'd rather not talk about or think about.
I did not know that. Now the movie is being re-edited in my head.
And we should mention that the always welcome Eve Arden.
You beat me to it. She's fantastic in this movie. But this film, as so many others do, takes full advantage of the incredibly rich Warner Brothers song catalog. It is one of the 2,436 movies that uses Nagasaki in one point or another, but it has a lot of Warner standards strewn through it. But there were actually original songs written for the film by veteran Warner composer, he of 42nd Street fame, Harry Warren, and lyrics by Ralph Blaine, who was a recent move over from MGM, where he had written Meet Me in St. Louis and various other films. So the team of Harry Warren and Ralph Blaine wrote Summer Holiday, a Warner Archive DVD release. They wrote that at MGM in 1946, didn't get released till 1948, but they obviously had a good enough working rapport that they worked together again and wrote the score for this film. The Technicolor is just gorgeous. It is absolutely lustrous, and they made Doris look so beautiful. We wouldn't be complete without mentioning the other leading man in the movie, the bad guy, the cad, Lee Bowman, who plays the heel that Doris has romantic interest in. And then she decides Jack Carson is better. And I always felt that that's one of the reasons why this film isn't more popular, is because if it's a choice between Jack Carson and Lee Bowman, I don't know. There's no doubt that Jack Carson's character really loves Doris Day's character. And some of this is partially autobiographical because Doris Day had already been married twice and divorced twice before this movie was made. She started on the road as a band singer and had two husbands, both of whom did not treat her well, and one of whom was the father of her son, Terry. She later married agent Martin Melcher, who adopted the child, and Terry Melcher, her son, has a connection to another film that we're going to be talking about later, which will surprise you. The story of Doris having a little boy of that age was really life imitating art or art imitating life. So it's a very interesting dynamic. Working woman having to support her child. Doris did not have it easy. Anyway, we think you're really going to love My Dream Is Yours. And that gives us an opportunity to talk about our next film, which is also a Doris Day Technicolor musical, but it is not set in contemporary times. It is set in the early part of the 20th century, around World War I, and I happen to love it a lot. It's called On Moonlight Bay. Doris Day co-stars with Gordon McRae. Her parents are played by Leon Ames, who is the father in Meet Me in St. Louis, and Rosemary DeCamp. And Mary Wicks, the wonderful Mary Wicks, is the family maid. And last but not least, a wonderful performance by young Billy Gray, who would soon go on to Father Knows Best. Billy Gray plays her little brother, Wesley. This film is loosely adapted from the Booth Tarkington Penrod stories, which were oft filmed by Warner Brothers, and we have released on DVD a few of the Penrod films that were made in the 30s. This is taking some of those thematic elements and reworking them, but it is plays secondary to more of the family comedy, and it really works out.
You know, there's that famous, I think it's Oscar Levant quote about Doris Day, where he made the quip, "I knew her before she was a virgin," and it's this film among a few others that, because we, as you can see in My Dream Is Yours, she's playing an adult woman with a child and fully experienced, and then movies like On Moonlight Bay and maybe one or two others were so popular and were such down the road family entertainments that unfortunately for Doris, she sort of became trapped by this virginal girl next door image that wasn't her life at all and wasn't really reflective of her talents as a performer. Nonetheless, that was her cross to bear because everyone loved her.
That's an interesting point, Dan, because you're right. Like me coming across, through the lovely Warner Archive collection and seeing the earlier Doris Day films was a surprise to me because I had just always assumed that she was like she was in this film, which is, by the way, great. Dan and I love the Penrod stories themselves. I wouldn't have thought they would have made a musical, but I was wrong, and that it's now slightly over 100 years ago, right? This is like the mid 1910s that this takes place, but like that nostalgia draw is always very strong, and especially in a post-war period to find a more innocent time, kind of not contaminated by World War One or Two. So it's very smart and really did hit all of those points you guys were talking about, and it's all here. And but 100 years later, it's interesting because these we experience those tropes through stuff from the 50s. So it's for us, that kind of nostalgia is a little more historic. And it may not quite land the same way, but it doesn't matter when you have Doris Day and wonderful material like this.
And there are a lot of really, really good songs in this movie.
This is also a 4K scan from Technicolor negatives, correct?
And to be clear, this is a 4K scan off the Technicolor negatives. My Dream Is Yours is not, but you can barely tell because it was made off such a wonderfully properly made interpositive. We did tests and found that we could get a great image from the IP. And so for true transparency, it is from an IP. However, it was such a good IP that we could tweak and make it look so great.
It looks fantastic.
It looks fantastic.
To be clear, it's not from a transparency. See what I did there?
Oh.
Back in history, this takes us to the late 1700s, I believe, correct?
Yes, 1789.
Charles Dickens was the author of a little book that you probably all had to read in school, but you don't have to anymore because now you can see the movie. A Tale of Two Cities, a David O. Selznick production made at MGM. Ronald Colman, who was on loan out from Goldwyn, where he was under contract, is a wonderful, wonderful leading man. And his performance in this film is probably one of his very, very best. I think the whole film in general is one of those rare literary adaptations that gets it right and doesn't feel that any shortcuts were taken. One very important director and one very important producer who would later have a big impact on cinema in the next decade, primarily at RKO. And I'm talking about Jacques Tourneur and Val Lewton. They were involved in the storming of the Bastille sequence at the highlight toward the end of the movie. And this film is really one of the all-time great MGM classics of the 30s. And it looks gorgeous on Blu-ray.
For a film that's inching up on being a century old, that is in turn an adaptation of a book written 100 years before that about events 100 years before that. I'm doing a lot of rounding. This movie holds up amazingly well. I've actually watched it 3 times since we started working on it, because every time I just try to skim it, I get sucked in. Ronald Colman, already one of my favorite actors, but I agree, Doris, this is definitely one of a great actor's greatest performances. It's a great adaptation. This film doesn't waste a minute, and it's still, this film plays as good as any film made in any decade from then to now. It's a great motion picture, and it's already a great story because of the Dickens, but it really is it's spectacle, it's heart, it's sacrifice, it's all there. And you're right. I mean, I was just amazed at how great this film looked.
It really pulls sort of the essence of the Tale of Two Cities kind of at its core, and it's really a lesson for anybody trying to do an adaptation as complex. And the cinematography, just, as we were saying, just as you guys were saying, like the talents behind it, the Blu-ray itself is, again, astounding. The first time I saw this was a VHS, because I was trying not to read the book for high school. Unfortunately, teachers knew that trick, so you had to do a little extra work. But it just looked incredible. And so with the really bringing out the best of the performances and the best of the looks and the cruelty of the villains, this is if you haven't seen this or this version, it's great. If you're a fan of Dickens, shame if you haven't seen it. And this is, why doesn't somebody pick this up and adapt this for modern television again? Because what a story that's so wound together and still something that resonates to this day.
Well, it obviously still resonates because we just released it today.
Yeah!
And the sales are good. As we record this, you'll be hearing it, folks, in the audience a little later. But initial pre-orders and sales were excellent, and we expect this to be a bestseller. And when a film was a big hit at the box office, that's not an unreal expectation. And certainly we can say the same thing about our next film, which was a mega hit for MGM and starred not 1, not 2, but 3 of their biggest stars. I'm talking about the 1936 romantic epic with the famous earthquake scene at the end, San Francisco. This stars Clark Gable, Jeanette MacDonald, and Spencer Tracy. And Spencer Tracy's role is almost a little bit in the supporting category. He had played leading roles prior to this, but it was clearly Gable's show. I think MGM did amazing work with this film in terms of recreating the 1906 earthquake, which is the climax of the motion picture. And the special effects and the editing is right out of, I want to say, Russian cinema.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
That's an excellent analogy that
I love that.
But yes, of course, this is in the period when people were first noticing what they were doing with the camera over in Russia, and it would have had an effect. And as now that you say it, yeah, for sure. I also have to say, it is sort of one of the things that's funny about the film. Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy plays Father Tim Mullen, childhood friend, and the two of them are playing characters. For once, we're used to seeing these guys playing characters that are younger than they actually are. In this film, they're playing characters that are much older than they actually are, because these are supposed to be like two weathered friends from the Barbary Coast who have come up together, and they're still kind of wet behind the ears. But they're both great actors. I'm not begrudging it. It's just funny to see them both at the beginning of who they were to become. And it also really seems like Spencer's in the movie just to make Clark feel a little bit more confident.
He's the Obi-Wan Kenobi here, and does it so well because this is, an action adventure musical. This is, like it's it is an
better have music.
It is an unexpected mix, like a genre-wise that really keeps you on your toes because when's the earthquake gonna hit? Like
right. And then you have Jack Holt, father of Tim, sort of playing a funny guy because he's supposed to be like the bad guy point of the love triangle, but he's not actually a bad guy. He just wants to rescue the opera singer.
And then, of course, there are many 30s movies where you can talk about like the power of the special effects. I mean, there are enough, right, that stick with you. But the San Francisco earthquake scene in this really stands up to any 70s disaster movie. Like what they were doing with the camera and the practical effects is it made me very nervous about living in Los Angeles. Let's just say that. And I still don't like brick buildings. Dan can attest to this day. And some of that comes back to this film.
Yeah, the basic setup is Clark Gable plays a nightclub owner on the Barbary Coast. His best friend grew up to become a priest, and it's sort of a tug of war for Blackie Morton's soul, which is already a good soul. I don't know why there's such a tug in it, but it is an MGM film. But underneath all of that, there's a great storyline about poor regulation. And
yes.
And Clark Gable is running for county supervisor to improve the fire regulations for building on the Barbary Coast, which is the poor building standards is what eventually creates conditions more than the earthquake that destroy old San Francisco. There is a subtle yet cogent political underpinning to the film, as well as a big story about a bad man learning to be a good man.
And this is on the tail, in 1933, there was a huge earthquake in Long Beach, and that helped pave the way for a better upgrade, seismic fitting, and an understanding of the limitations of the buildings. So this is an important film to, it's also a subtle piece of propaganda for better building standards, which I wholeheartedly agree with. And LA is not a pile of rubble.
I just also want to call out that famous title tune. It became one of the great popular songs of its era, and the film was so successful that it was re-released, I think, at least twice nationally, if not 3 times. I'm so pleased that we're able to bring it to Blu-ray, and they changed the ending of the film when they re-released it in later years to add the Golden Gate Bridge into the end title. But what we've done is we've presented it as it was originally presented, and we have the alternate ending as a bonus on the disc. Now, this restoration is very interesting because the original negative of this movie, like so many other MGM black and white original negatives, burnt in the fire. But we were able to find a nitrate fine grain second generation dubbed in French. But that meant that if anybody sang, there would be subtitles because the singing would be in English. And of course, the main titles and end titles are in English. So those come from our domestic fine grain, which is not nitrate. However, this looks so much better than our DVD look and really gives the film a sheen and a shine that you only get when you're working from nitrate. And we were very fortunate to find this element because you don't stumble across a nitrate fine grain every day, Now we're going to go ahead 20 years into the future. 20 years into the future. With a film as different from San Francisco probably as you can get. Elia Kazan is the director. Carol Baker is Baby Doll in a story that only could have come from the mind of Tennessee Williams. Carl Malden is terrific in this movie, as is a very young Eli Wallach. I really, really like this movie. and it has a very, very underrated or not talked about very much cool score by Kenyon Hopkins. It was kind of representative of the freedom that Kazan had working at Warner Brothers, where he could make movies like Baby Doll, which was followed by A Face in the Crowd. That was because Jack Warner really believed in Kazan, and they had been through the trenches on Streetcar Named Desire and East of Eden, and there's a real bond between Kazan and Warner Brothers that would extend itself really till the late 60s with a film that is of kind of a different quality, the arrangement. But that's 1969, so it's an over 20-year relationship between the studio and the director. And Baby Doll on DVD was the wrong aspect ratio. It was Academy ratio 1:37. And so you saw the top and the bottom that you weren't supposed to see. This is the correct aspect ratio of 1:85. Because in 1956, the only theaters that had aperture plates and lenses for 1:37 movies were repertory theaters that showed old movies. All the commercial theaters were set up for either scope or 1:85 or 1:66 or some form of widescreen. So if anybody says that Kazan intended to shoot Baby Doll in Academy ratio, sorry, you're wrong. But guys, what did you think of the movie?
In college, I performed in Tennessee Williams' 27 Wagons Full of Cotton, which, some people are under the misapprehension that Baby Doll's an original story of Tennessee Williams, but it is very much based on 27 Wagons Full of Cotton. So I was already somewhat familiar with the material, but I have to say, Baby Doll shocked the pants off the League of Decency in 56, and it's still a shocking film today. And what's also really amazing about the film is, people, when they're teaching dramatic writing, often espouse that the characters must be sympathetic, but because we live in a barely literate society, people think that means likable. And it means, no, you have to be able to see yourself inside them. You don't have to like them. And I can tell you, out of the three main characters in Baby Doll, nobody's likable, but the film is mesmerizing. It is basically about a state collision between three egos, a morally bankrupt cotton gin owner, his younger Sicilian rival, and the child bride who uses their sexuality as a weapon, but is nonetheless being used as a pawn in this war between these two guys. And they're all terrible people, but you can't take your eyes off the screen.
This is one of those films that, and Dan, you touched on it, because the subject matter itself is a lightning rod. But the people involved, and including Tennessee Williams and Elia Kazan, and of course all the amazing actors, it's like this is one of these lightning in a bottle sort of productions where it's not what you expect. I guess that's just the simplest way to put it, and it's hard to categorize. And even if you look at the posters, you can tell it probably was a little hard for the advertising department to market, and almost as it is today. But and some people have tried to describe this as a black comedy to perhaps help people kind of contextualize this material, but it is it evokes the sort of feelings that a great piece of drama, like usually you can only maybe see in a theater or like in something, just like somewhere else. Like very rarely do you get this kind of thing to come together so well on film, and it's so unforgettable. And again, like now that this is on Blu-ray in just a beautiful treatment, and it's so haunting and stagey, and the lighting itself is so important in the set. This is a must for film fans. And Dan, I love that you were in 27 Wagons Full of Cotton, which is a like a drama school challenge, to say the least. That's and you're absolutely right. This isn't that, but it is, but it isn't.
Right.
It's so hard to describe. But Malden, this is my favorite Carl Malden appearance. It's like you can smell the sweat through your monitor. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. And I first time I saw a good copy of this was back on ye old streaming service. And I was so excited when this was announced because it gives me a good reason to see it again, and it's absolutely worth it.
Ooh, speaking of streaming and baby dolls, that's a great segue into talking about Harley Quinn, the first and second seasons.
That's right, because this is an animated series that was originally created for the DC Universe streaming service.
Dan, and the reason why I'm talking up so soon is that this kind of has a similar sort of sinuous way of getting into your head. You were the first one to alert me about this show and how different and great it was, because you were watching the DC Universe streaming service, and you were like, season one, I think season one had ended, and you were like, you haven't seen this yet? You have not seen anything like this before. And the Harley Quinn movie had come out, and so I was familiar with the basic plot, and that's where this starts, because the anti-hero Harley Quinn has just broken up with the Joker, and what is she going to do? So she forms her own crew, and then it makes a complete right-hand turn from the motion picture.
People have used the term adult animation a lot to describe certain niche of cartoons, but I don't think, shy of the output of Ralph Bakshi, that anyone has made as an adult cartoon as Harley Quinn, which is light years beyond any grown-up interpretation we've seen, comedic or otherwise, of these comic book characters. And additionally, when I think about how much our perception of these properties has changed just in the past 10 or 15 years, like in a previous podcast, Matt, when you were talking about Legends of the Superheroes, and I was like, oh, that's never going to come out, because I was aware of the sensitivity of people at DC for Adam West Batman at the time. And now you think about a time where a show like Harley Quinn, which isn't just Harley Quinn and the Joker, it's the full Rogues Gallery, and then some, getting this incredibly adult, incredibly hilarious interpretation, and it's fine. There's no franchise guardians freaking out about, oh no. There's room, as we have said on many panels, there's room for all kinds of Batman. And one of the great things about this show is its vocal cast, which includes our second favorite vocal Batman, Diedrich Bader, as the Batman. Yes. But, I mean, among the talents next to Haley Cuoco was Harley Quinn. You've got Lake Bell as Poison Ivy, Alan Tudyk as the Joker and Clayface, and his Clayface is hilarious. J.B. Smoot and Frank the Plant, Tony Hale as Dr. Psycho, Ron Funches as King Shark, also hilarious. And then Christopher Maloney as one of the most unique interpretations of Commissioner Gordon anyone's ever seen. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. The first season takes Harley from post-breakup to a new lease on life, and the second season sees her defending her turf against, I guess, the Legion of Indecency. Also the show has a very about time relationship between Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn. One Blu-ray released 2 seasons. George, what did you think of Harley Quinn?
Yeah,
I loved it from the very first episode. I just thought it was so cutting edge and so fearless. And I was glad to see them kind of take the gloves off and, you know, let Harley Quinn be just as wild and unpredictable as she is in the films that we've seen and in the comic books. And I think they did a terrific job. I think it looks great. I loved Harley Quinn. I'm so glad that it's popular, and I hope it continues.
There's supposed to be a 3rd season.
Well, we can look forward to that. Our next film is a portrait of someone who I have had just a slight fondness for their work since a very early age. I was obsessed with his work before it became a thing and more popular to do so. But it's basically a look at the life and career and creations of composer and lyricist Stephen Sondheim, who had his first major success at age 27 as the lyricist of West Side Story. 2 years later, he was the lyricist of Gypsy. But what he really wanted to do was write music and lyrics, and he got to do that with his next show, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. But he really didn't get to hit the big time until 1970, and he broke molds on Broadway with a show called Company, which won the Tony Award. The next year, he came out with Follies, which is still one of the great musicals that people are trying to conquer and do it well and do it right. And then that was followed by A Little Night Music, which again won the Tony. And since then, he has given us Sweeney Todd and Assassins and Into the Woods, and so many of his works have become films, and he is truly revered as the great American composer of the second part of the 20th century. James Lapine, who became his collaborator, starting with Sunday in the Park with George, which was his first project to be done not on Broadway, although it moved to Broadway. It was done with Playwrights Horizons. Lapine directed Into the Woods as well on Broadway and worked with Sondheim on many other projects, and directs this film, which has a very brisk running time and uses 6 of Sondheim's songs as a basis by which to tell his life story. So what HBO Documentary Films here has done exactly something perfect. They have taken the very best and essence of what makes Sondheim such a talent as a creator and used both archival footage as well as some newly filmed presentations of his songs into a really remarkable and unique film. It's not completely a documentary. It's not nearly a talking heads kind of thing. It is really a unique and terribly creative piece, and it belonged on Blu-ray. It was only available on DVD. And when we had the opportunity, I said, let's get this on Blu-ray so it can look and sound as great as possible. And I'm delighted that we can make it available to you right now. It's available right now.
Yeah, I thought this was a really fascinating way to sort of come at Sondheim obliquely, which makes it a much more rewarding documentary than a standard sort of biopic style. And it really gets into his heart and soul, which is the creativity of his songwriting. And there's some really surprisingly moving moments in which he talks about what moves him to do what he does. And there's also some great archival performance footage and some original staged stuff they do with a pretty talented group of guest stars. But if you're interested in theater, the creative process, music, the history of the 20th century, this is an important documentary.
I think that it's going to make a lot of theater fans very happy. And Sondheim theater fans don't just live in New York, they live all over the world. So, and he's working on a new musical right now. I hope we get to see it. I really do. He is an amazing man, and this film does a wonderful job at capturing his talent and his essence. Now, using a docudrama form, our next film takes a very, very dark turn, much darker than Sondheim's Sweeney Todd, which was a pretty dark thing for a Broadway musical to conquer. This is unfortunately a true story, and this is a documentary miniseries that was created for the Epix Network, and it's called Helter Skelter, An American Myth. This has reenactments. It was spread over 5 episodes, and it has reenactments of certain stories involving Charles Manson, the Manson family, which I don't need to go into. That's pretty well known, I would say. But there are also some former members of the Manson family interviewed and other people who are familiar with what happened at that time. It's, of course, terribly disturbing, but what's really remarkable about it is it isn't just the same old, because there were many documentaries before. There were 2 TV movies before that Warner Brothers Television made. This really does a beautiful job of interweaving never before seen interviews, archival footage, and newly unearthed photography. If you think you know everything about what happened with the murders and the Manson family and what happened around them, you will be surprised at what this reveals. This is a DVD release. It is not a Blu-ray release. It covers a lot of ground. There's a lot of new content created within it that really makes it, you really can't take your eyes off of it. It's really pulverizing viewing. The quintessential opposite of a lot of the happy musicals that we're releasing this month. But all stories need to be told, and this is something that I think a lot of people are going to be impressed by.
Yeah, I'm going to say that the director, Leslie Chilcott, and the producers, which include Greg Berlanti, who's most famous for producing everything these days, and that's not in any way an insult. I just can't believe people can be as busy as these people are. But what this does really well is it places the Manson murders in its broader cultural context, and it really shows how much the American psyche was both shattered and changed. And it's really interesting to watch this in conjunction with after seeing Tarantino's Once Upon a Time, because
I had the same thought.
Yeah, it was very much sort of trying to show people like this is what it was, and after this is what it became, and he's doing a what if. But this show, this miniseries very much encapsulates the change in what happened and the darker place we were moving into in the 70s.
Absolutely. And so we highly recommend this. Greg Berlanti is quite fascinating in the multitude of different kind of works he does, in addition to all the television work, primarily around the DC franchises. He's proving himself to not just fit into one pat box. This is a very impressive and important work that deserves to be seen. Helter Skelter is really riveting television entertainment, and these DVDs are an important part of any serious collector's library, especially those who are interested in 20th century pop culture. Now it's the time for our podcast where we share communications that have come from you, our customers, and they, as we remain in this pandemic situation, have to reach us via email as opposed to our preferential way of through the U.S. mail with a stamp. If you send a stamp to us at the office, it ain't going to get to us because we ain't there. But you can reach us by sending an email to
podcast@wb.com. And now let me say, it is now working again, but it wasn't working pretty much till today. And unfortunately, with the exception of the past week, it was not functioning. And those emails, if you sent them, we could not retrieve them. So I apologize, but please send them again, and we are getting them again. I think somehow they know when we're recording, because as we were talking right now, 3 of them came in as we were talking. Which is why maybe in the background you guys are going to hear some annoying chimes while George is talking. That's people sending us emails while we're recording. All right, so here's number 1, which is actually the most recently arrived. Dear Warner Archive Podcast, I look forward to the Warner Archive announcements each month, and you made Elizabeth Taylor fans like me very happy last year with your beautiful releases of Reflections in a Golden Eye and Beau Brummel on Blu-ray. The latter is one that I never thought I'd ever own, looking so good. Thank you. Are there any plans afoot to release Elizabeth's breakout film, National Velvet, on Blu-ray? Thank you for the incredible work you do and the miracles you perform, Andy.
I wouldn't say no.
All right, Andy, that's your answer. We wouldn't say no. Next up, we have a letter, a missive from Dylan. Dear WAC team, thank you for your amazing slate of films from last year. While I can be picky with the films I like, you released quite a few gems that were very pleasant surprises, including Young Man with a Horn, Kentucky Colonels, and The Mortal Storm. My main question for you is, can we expect any Blu-ray upgrades of Fred Zinnemann in 2021? And he goes on to list some Fred Zinnemann films in full first name. I noticed that Alfred Santel's 2 Anne Hardy films, The Life of Virgie Winters and The Right to Romance, have never gotten any official releases. Are there any rights issues or elements stopping this, or has WAC just not gotten to them yet? Thank you for doing what you do, and I look forward to what you guys have in store for the future.
We don't have anything to announce on either front. Both directors' work are being considered for future release.
Here is an email from Bill. Hello again, George, Matt, and Dan. I'm wondering if there are any plans to release Top Cat on Blu-ray. 2021 is the series' 60th anniversary. Thanks, and keep up the great work.
It's something we're thinking about if we can make the numbers work, and we see a lot of support for other animated releases of similar nature. It's going to be a very expensive undertaking because episodic television is very expensive to release on Blu-ray, and to go back to the film and clean it all up and make it look beautiful. And you can see that in our Johnny Quest and our Jetsons. It's not an inexpensive proposition, so we need to run the numbers to see if we can make it happen. But it's been at the top of our list for quite a while. I wouldn't give up hope. That wraps up today's Warner Archive podcast, but we'll be back with another one soon, as we've got a scintillating group of all sorts of jewels and excitement ready for you, our loyal consumers, as we get ready to celebrate our 12th birthday. So look for that next podcast. But until that time, I'm George Feltenstein.
I'm at MR Matt Patterson.
When I get to the bottom, I go back to the top.
Thanks for listening, and look forward to the next Warner Archive podcast.